I'm Claire Edwards, and you're listening to Authentic Leadership, a series of conversations, insights, and inspirations with leaders who are real, raw, and authentic. Today, I bring you a conversation with Wayne Pearce. And if you're Australian and into rugby league, yes, that's the Wayne Pearce. Wayne shares with us his wisdom, perspective, and experience from being a high-performance coach in both sport and business. And we explore the system he uses to help leaders and teams to gain a much deeper understanding of one another. Since interviewing Wayne, I took part in his 3-day introduction to the process communication model, and I can say it was extremely insightful. From the field to the boardroom, enjoy the golden nuggets that Wayne has to share. I met Wayne recently when I was moderating a leadership event, and Wayne was on the panel. And his outlook, his perceptions and opinions on building high-performing teams really struck me. So to those who love rugby league and live in Australia, look, Wayne Junior Pearce needs absolutely no introduction. In fact, he's a living legend. To the rest of the world, let me share a little bit more. Wayne is a former and highly successful rugby league player and coach, and was awarded the Medal of the Order of Australia for service to rugby league. After he retired from sport, Wayne used his knowledge of building teams to perform at their highest level and in a short amount of time to apply to the world of business, where he consults with organizations on performance, leadership, and high-performance teamwork. I am so looking forward to unlocking Wayne's amazing brain and extracting the wisdom of years and the wisdom of teams. Wayne, welcome to Authentic Leadership.
Yes, Claire, thanks for having me on board. I'm very excited to be chatting to you.
Not half as excited as I am, I can tell you.
Well, that's good to hear.
Look, first question, Wayne. Just reading through the work that you do, you focus really strongly on the essence of trust in both leadership and teams. So before we move on to the world of business, I'm really curious to find out more about how you experienced and then later on built trust in your sporting teams. As you know, from what I hear, there was often very little time to build up and perform at such a high level, yet still you succeeded.
Yeah, it's a really interesting concept. When I finished, in fact, when I was playing rugby league back in the old era, back in the last millennium, we had to work jobs because the pay wasn't sufficient to sustain a full-time career as a rugby league player. So we all worked other jobs. And what I came to appreciate was that there were certain things that weren't happening in the business world that I was experiencing in my various jobs in the business world, that I was experiencing in the sporting world, that really define why there's a massive gap in regards to team capabilities in business versus in sport. And one of the big fundamentals that get missed often in business is the importance of creating a high trust culture. And that high trust culture is something that needs to sit at the epicenter of any aspirational team culture, because if you don't have the employees or team members who are really feeling as though they have got each other's backs and that will support each other and make sacrifices for each other, then it's almost impossible to create a high-performance team. And in sport, coaches, the head coaches in particular, will work overtime to create a high-performance culture anchored in this trust concept. And it's something that is absolutely front and center of any coach at the start of each season, is to really try and build that strong trust base before you actually even worry about the technicalities of game plans and fitness regimes and all this sort of stuff.
Yeah, and there was a story that you shared that I'd love you to reshare if possible, because again, for those who are listening internationally, there's a competition between two states in Australia, between New South Wales and Queensland, and it's called the State of Origin, and it's the most passionate game in sport that I certainly have ever experienced. And I think what struck me about what you were saying is the short amount of time that players have to come together, because they're all from different clubs and now, in different states. How does that work in such a short time, Wayne?
Yeah, well, I think what we're talking about here, the state of origin, is an excellent case study into how quickly you can build a team, but that it's absolutely based and anchored on a fundamental premise of the team members trusting each other. So the state of origin, for those people who aren't aware of it, is it's a representative team of two different states in Australia playing against each other. It's a team selected from where you were born. So if you were born in Queensland, you play for Queensland. If you're born in New South Wales, you play for New South Wales. But the players that are selected are playing in a whole lot of different clubs spread right around the country. And prior to the state of origin match, which is not played until mid-season, the players have been training with their clubs, playing with their clubs for up to 7 months prior to the team being selected. And then all of a sudden, all these players are from all different clubs, stuck in this representative team that represents either Queensland or New South Wales. And the coach has only got them for 8 days before the first game to create a winning team that's based around a high-performance teamwork. And that is really, really interesting in itself, to take that the coach has only 8 days to build a high-performance team. Because when you talk about business, you talk about, well, how long does it take to build a high-performing team in business? And most business leaders will sort of say it takes a lot longer. But the interesting thing is that to fast-track the process of developing this high-performance team, the first 2 days, approximately 2 days of the camp, there's absolutely no focus really on the football side of the technical side, the fitness side, the tactic side. First 2 days, the first half days, you've got to get the PR out of the way and make sure the players are fit, fitness tests and stuff like that. The next day and a half is really all about bonding. It's all about building connections between players, and it's really about them getting, and the basis to that is really getting to understand each other and emotionally connecting. And that's a really critical aspect of what this high-performance team, this trust is. And it's really to do with the connectivity, and that connectivity is the emotional connection that players, or in a business landscape, employees have.
Well, in effect, you're creating a new tribe, aren't you? We're tribal in nature. Our brains are social organs, and I think, what's the saying? Is it mate against mate, state against state, or something? That you're now changing allegiances.
Yeah, well, that's true. Yeah, and what you're actually doing at a neuroscience level, what we're doing is we're stimulating the release of oxytocin. So when you stimulate the release of oxytocin, what you're actually doing is creating opportunities for people to really connect. That's why on the illicit drug market, MDMA is such a strong drug that people can become addicted to, because people feel this connection with each other when they're actually consuming that drug. So naturally, in the workplace or in a sporting environment, as in a sports team, if you can create that feeling and the players are eliciting this oxytocin, and what happens is there's going to be lots of connections between people that previously may have viewed each other differently.
Yeah, that's a really, really important point. And so, transferring this back to the business world. And so we have the evidence. We have the evidence of high-performing teams in sport. We have the evidence that we can build a team quickly when we focus on connection. We have the evidence of oxytocin being a trust molecule. What, in your opinion, Wayne, is stopping leaders from embracing this?
It's purely and simply, I think, a lack of understanding, a lack of knowledge of what constitutes the foundations of a high-performance team. So over the years, over the decades, I should say, not the years, the decades that I've worked and been involved with sport and business, what I've come to appreciate is that most of the leaders in business don't understand what constitutes the fundamentals of teamwork. In fact, a study done by Korn Ferry a few years ago, back in, I think, 2014, they looked at leadership competency gaps in Australia, and the biggest the number one glaring leadership competency gap that was hardest to recruit and hardest to train was building effective teams. So where do people go and learn that? My university for learning all this sort of stuff was the sporting field. But getting back to what you're talking about is in a business sense, a lot of bosses focus on the technical side of teamwork, and they look at where we need this particular type of competencies in the team. We need this particular type of competency in the team, and they get all that balanced up reasonably well. What they don't get is the fact that that's fine, but if you don't understand how to build trust and get people to feel the connections, then you're not going to have an outcome. In fact, most of the team building activities that I went to when I was working in the business sector was anchored around going and building a raft together, or doing some high ropes where you're supporting each other on high ropes and this sort of stuff. That's not where the value lies. The best return on your investment of time is to put some time into having conversations between individuals that allows them to understand each other better, which means not just talking work stuff, talking what makes each other tick. So it's a space that a lot of leaders feel they shouldn't go to or they can't go to. Well, I can tell you now, I've been running workshops for 20 years and I've never had anybody push back on it, because what happens is, provided you allow people to share what they want to share within the topic you designate, they are empowered to hold back stuff if they want. But most people will share more stuff than they thought they'd share, because what happens is, when you are sharing some personal stuff to somebody and you feel that person's really engaged and listening, you get this little squirt of oxytocin. So you actually release that, you become a little bit more relaxed and you let a little bit more out. And at the end, this sense of allowing yourself to be understood is quite powerful and quite connective.
You know, just listening to you there, and obviously we can maybe only speak for Australia, and maybe you do work internationally as well. But I'm just wondering, is there still a perception? I mean, you know, we're entering 2020, a new decade, but is there still a perception of you know, building the tribe, building connection, building trust, showing empathy, showing that you care? Is there still a perception that it's a bit soft and fluffy in your experience?
Oh, there's no doubt that there's lots of old school bosses around, and those old school bosses have given the wrong impression to some of the up and coming emerging bosses. But there's definitely a changing of the guard, and I feel that there's a lot of people out there that are prepared to experiment more. The biggest challenge is that people, by nature, human beings by nature, don't want to take risks, particularly in a business that's driven by timelines, driven by perceptions that if we keep doing what we've done, then we're going to get some great results. But it requires you to take a risk, and it requires a step out of your comfort zone to facilitate discussions along the lines of what we're talking about. And that's why I find myself reasonably busy working with companies, because they themselves aren't able to start those conversations because they've never had them. So, but once they've had the conversations, it's easy for the companies then and the leaders then to continue to nurture those conversations, because the employees, the team members, feel so good once they've actually gone into that space.
Yeah, and it's strange that, you know, it's always been there in the sporting field, yet you look at these sporting types and they're very, you know, masculine, and it just seems a bit of a juxtaposition, really, doesn't it?
Well, it does, but and it's not spoken about outside the confines of the sporting teams. But when these conversations occur, and every single sports team that's worth their mustard and actually coached well, the coaches will facilitate in their off season before this competition starts some sort of training camp where they'll go away and they'll do elements of this. So but what happens is a lot of those players will share some emotion. So what happens if I share some emotion with you, and we're talking about a conversation that really struck a nerve with me, and I just share a little bit of a quiver in my voice, a little bit of grief, how are you going to respond? Are you going to respond, if you're a decent person, you're going to respond with some compassion and empathy. And that's the complementary emotional connection that constitutes a bond. So I share some emotion, you share some complementary emotion with me, and that's where the connection starts. And it doesn't just finish there, but that's where the connection starts.
And I have to be aware and present to hearing that in your voice, to seeing that in your face. And I'm wondering if this is a lead into. I'm really curious about the model that you've trained up in, the process communication model. Is there a correlation between what you've just said and this model that you are accredited in and use?
Yeah, no, there is. The model we're talking about is the process communication model. There's absolutely a correlation there. But what happens in that moment when I'm sharing something to you and you're engaged and you're listening and you're feeling this sense of connection back, we're actually entering the flow state. And when we're in flow, as the research shows, we're feeling this amazing experience where nothing else matters outside of that moment, and that further exacerbates the connection, and it also leads to an incredible opportunity to move forward, not just in that one-on-one relationship, but collectively across the business. Doing this sort of stuff allows the team to move forward very quickly.
And actually, I might park the process communication model for a second. I'm just thinking, in your experience and companies that you've worked with, where do you see that they're getting it right, Wayne?
In terms of teamwork?
In terms of that emotional connection, that you see that's there, that leaders are aware of it and facilitating it?
Most businesses, when they understand the science of it and they've experienced it, most businesses absolutely will go there and they'll continue to nurture that. The biggest challenge for most organisations, small businesses, big businesses, multinationals, whatever, the biggest challenge is the frontline leaders understanding the concepts and having some tools to apply those concepts. That's the biggest challenge, absolutely, without a doubt. And I mean, teamwork's, there's a number of layers that are really fundamental. What we're talking about here is so far is trust, but once the trust box is ticked, or in parallel with that, you've got to also have clear expectations, and clear behavioural expectations is a gap. Most businesses are pretty good around setting goals, but in terms of targets, but the behavioural piece is often a gap, and therefore that creates frustrations because people then aren't able to tick the next box again, which is the accountability box. People really struggle in having the conversations with each other to keep each other accountable. Well, firstly, they should be keeping themselves accountable, but even if they do that, they'll struggle with the accountability in keeping each other accountable, because they don't actually know how to have those conversations. It's not taught anywhere in our school system. It's not taught at university. It's understandable that that's a significant gap in our business world as well.
Absolutely. And I'm just thinking about, because I worked for many years in IT, and where those behavioral expectations weren't laid out, we would tolerate brilliant jerks. They were people who were so innovative and creative in the company, but treated their peers like crap. And it wasn't addressed. And I think I was quite lucky that for many years I worked for an American organization, and in the performance management system were always behavioral and attitudinal traits. And I just assumed that this would be the norm everywhere else, and was quite taken aback when I started working in IT and thought, why are these people being tolerated?
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. Yeah, one of the real energy vampires in any organisation or any team is lack of alignment around what expectations are. Because if my expectation is that we do this because no one's really clarified anything else, and your expectation is slightly different, that gap between what you're doing and what I'm doing creates a bit of an irritation, maybe an annoyance. at a deeper level, it creates frustrations. But all these sorts of things, frustrations, annoyances, irritations, are little chips away into the wall that are creating lack of alignment, and also they're sucking the energy out of the team. So one of the things I'm pretty firm on is identifying a set of gap behaviours. So in other words, identifying where are the gaps, what's causing the frustrations, and articulating a set of rules that if we had those rules in place, they would eliminate the frustrations. And so they're in. You can come up with a finite set of team rules on that basis. You don't have to worry about all the stuff we're doing well. What are the things we're not doing so well? Let's place some behavioural rules around those, and then we can actually police each other and keep each other accountable. Firstly, keep ourselves accountable, but keep others accountable around those as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you've talked about trust. You've talked about accountability. I think one of the other, I don't know if it's a three-legged stool for you, but one of the other things that in researching the work that you do is around motivation. Can you share a little bit about that, Wayne?
Yeah, motivation is a concept, a word that's thrown around a lot. And at the end of the day, all I can do as a team leader for you is I can inspire you by fertilising your mind based on what it is that motivates you. There are some generic motivators. People like a sense of growth. People at a non-conscious level want desire and crave a sense of connection. There's a number of different generic motivators, but where the rubber hits the road for most people, and what causes distress for most people, is when their psychological needs are not being fed. And the primary psychological need for every human being is anchored in the type of person that they are. So if you're the type of person that's quite, you talked about IT, quite logical, rational, organised, can be a bit anal at times. The primary psychological need for that type of person is a sense of achievement.
Yeah.
Because there's an existential question hovering over that type of person. That is, am I competent? So they're constantly trying to show that they are competent. And if they don't feel as though you're acknowledging their competency, they'll slip into a pattern of distress that is a negative way of getting that question answered. So that type of person in distress will start to overthink, overcomplicate. They'll start to micromanage. If they go further and deeper into distress, they'll start to get frustratedly angry and think everybody's stupid around them, that type of stuff. Now, if I'm a team leader, and I see that particular sort of behaviours in behaviour in one of my team members, then I need to support that person by feeding their need and in a healthy way, as opposed to another. At the other end of the spectrum, we've got those type of people who have a completely different type of personality. They're the people that are very compassionate, they're warm, they're sensitive. They are driven by an existential question that's quite different. For them, it's, am I lovable? So they're the type of person that wants to be liked. And that type of person, if they don't feel that they are liked, they'll slip into a space where they will lose assertiveness, and they'll try and be super nice and be overcompensating to be nice. And they don't want to say that it's impossible for them to say no. They'll sacrifice their own pleasure just to try and please other people. But if they slip further down into distress, they'll slip into a space where they will invite self-criticism and blame themselves and put the victim's hat on. So, either way, there's two quite different sets of distress behaviours. But if I'm a team leader, or I'm a peer of somebody that's in that space, or I'm a parent, or I'm a counsellor, or whoever, I'm a coach, then I can actually help that person exit the distress space by feeding their needs in a healthy way.
And when you're working with teams and facilitating the conversation and sharing these existential needs, what are some of the sort of the reactions, the light bulbs of understanding that you get when you share this? When you're working with teams and you're sharing with them and helping them see what their own individual needs are, what their personality preferences are, what these existential needs are, What sort of reactions do you get?
Universally, people go, "Wow, that's so accurate. I know exactly. This fits me." And when they understand that, then what they a lot of them for the first time in their life, they've got a framework that they can look at and help them best operate and function when they're under pressure. Because when the psychological needs are not being fed is when we're under pressure, when we're under the pump. And when we're under the pump, that's when we need to actually be at our best and not at our worst. So
Yeah.
most people will really embrace the tools and look to basically sort of how can they adopt this on a bigger scale across their life. A lot of people also say, well, wow, I've come here today for this work seminar, and I can see this is going to benefit my family because my kids are in this space or my partner's in this space. So it's quite interesting.
It's the ripple effect is fantastic, isn't it? Now, what about you? What's Wayne's core psychological need, and how does Wayne behave when that's not being met?
Yeah, so the process communication model, I came across it 9 years ago, and because I upskill, I do courses every year as a facilitator to try and stay contemporary and on top of what I need to be on top of. And anyhow, to cut a long story short, I stumbled across this particular skill set because I was researching an article for one of my clients on teamwork, and I was citing the Space Shuttle Challenger disaster, and I wanted to check the date. I just wanted to check the date of the accident. So I went onto the website of NASA, and they made reference to process communication model and how it is assisted in NASA's training of astronauts, recruitment of astronauts, et cetera, et cetera. So anyhow, I thought, and I hadn't heard of it, so I ended up booking into a course. And at that particular point, there was no one running programs in Australia, other than a person that came over from New Zealand. So, but at the end of the course, I thought, wow, this is amazing. And anyhow, to cut to the chase, when I understood what made me tick, and not everybody's simple and can be defined by one existential question. For some people, they're depending on how their lives have evolved and their personalities have evolved. There's 6 different dimensions to all of us human beings. There's 6 different, if you like, inks that go into making us who we are. Some are highly concentrated, some are not so highly concentrated. The highly concentrated ones are the ones that have the biggest impact on us. But to answer your question, what drives me, I'm driven by a sense of wanting to leave a legacy. And the existential question for me is, am I trustworthy? So that's why, for me, this trust piece really resonates, because at my core, that's the existential question. So if under pressure, I don't manage my distress, but I actually have learned to manage my distress because I understood this process communication model concept. But the type of person like me, under pressure, they'll slip into a first degree distress space where they'll focus on what's wrong rather than what's right. They'll get nitpicky around what's wrong rather than what's right. And the reason that relates back to trustworthy is because at a non-conscious level, if I'm helping you by focusing on what's wrong and telling you, then you should trust me. But that type of person doesn't work that way in reality. These people get seen as being nitpicky. They're seen as being narcs, and there's not much appreciation for the existential question. In second degree, in distress, I tend to and can tend to push my beliefs when I'm in distress, but hopefully that doesn't happen anymore. And at the end of the day, that type of person who's driven by that question, existential question, really wants to make a difference. They want to leave a legacy. That's really where I'm at. I'm just disclosing my inner workings.
Thank you. Well, it is the Raw Authentic Leadership podcast, so you knew there might be a curveball coming in at some stage. And I'm just curious, going back to the NASA thing, thinking, gosh, these people are stuck in this tiny capsule for a long time together. So you may or may not have insight as to how NASA might have worked with the model with astronauts.
Yeah. So when the missions were short, much shorter, when they'd go up there for a few days, then they recruited a lot of people that were very cognitive, and that was a primary aspect of their personality. And in fact, it's really, really fascinating because the guy who developed this particular skill set, NASA heard about what he developed, and they got him in to observe their rational selection process. And because he was so accurate in terms of providing feedback on which astronauts would go on to be good astronauts and which weren't, and they correlated his input with the output of the astronauts over a period of time. They became fascinated by the skills that he had, but because he was getting so busy, he couldn't go and go and sit in all the recruitment interviews and observe. So what they did was they funded him to develop a profiling tool for the astronauts, which is nowadays used as a profiling tool for the course that you do. So there's a long history of association with NASA, who then also basically validated the profile.
Oh, wow, that's fascinating. And I'm thinking, linking this to diversity in business, we look at ethnic diversity and gender diversity, and we look at diversity of thought, but now you're bringing in diversity of psychological need, of those existential needs, and how might that diversity then contribute to a higher performing team rather than people who are, the same needs, same thoughts, groupthink, end up all being the same and not creative.
No, that's true. Absolutely true. In fact, getting back to the NASA thing, so in the early days, that they wanted a lot more of the cognitive type personality, or personalities, I should say. Then when the missions sort of evolved into space stations where people up there for months, they needed people that had a much, much stronger component in the compassion dimension. And because the people that are compassionate, sensitive, warm type person, really strong in that, they're the people that are able to resolve conflicts a lot more sensitively, and certainly look to create a more harmonious environment.
Yeah, because you can hardly go out and get yourself some space.
That's right. You can't go. It's a bit hard to go for a walk out down the park, and spacewalks are limited by by a little length of cable.
Oh, wow. And again, this isn't, we haven't prepared these questions, and forgive me if I'm putting you on the spot, but just thinking about, some of the teams that you've worked with over the years, and without naming names, can you think of an example where you've managed to help turn somebody round who was this very traditional, rational, logical, analytical, emotions are kept at the door, to someone who understands trust and is connected and empathic? Have you got a success story, Wayne?
Yeah, it's probably more because I finished coaching sort of 20 years ago, but I've certainly had examples where I've coached senior business leaders over the past 10 years, and quite a few situations where the individuals have not necessarily changed, but because you can't change the base dimension of a person, but what you can do is you can get them to energize the other dimensions. So if someone's that logical, rational, organized type person, not really connected to emotions at all, you can actually, if they are aware of the need to engage their emotions and open up and share some stuff with individuals, because that's how other individuals are engaged, then there's plenty of examples of people I've worked with that have been very successful in that space. In fact, that's the aim of the course, the 3-day process communication course that I run, the public courses. That's the objective. Each of us human beings has a preferred channel, or in some people it's channels of communication. There's 4 channels of communication. This is the evidence supports this, and most people in business and most people in the school environment are anchored in 2 of those channels, and in a summary version of them, it's basically one of them is the information sharing channel, and the other one is the compassion sharing channel. So most people can blend one of those or both of those together and communicate with probably 65 to 70% of the population. That's what the research shows. But the other 30%, the ones that often those type of people who need the other two channels are the ones that often get missed in school, and business they struggle as well. And that's because one of the channels is the humour channel, the playful contact channel. It's those type of people who need, and they're constantly throwing humour into the conversation. If you're a straighty 180 and you're trying to have a conversation with them, they'll just switch off straight away. And in school, if teachers don't know how to connect with them and don't identify what those students are like, then they're going to miss the boat. And the other one is the direct and to the point channel, the succinct and direct and to the point. And for a lot of people, that's a rude way to communicate. But there's around about 15% of the population that absolutely needs that type of engagement. And if you don't give them the type of engagement, that will force them to go into distress as well. The real irony is that in our education system, these channels of communication are not taught. It's not taught in our tertiary system as well.
Yeah.
For teachers are not taught these fundamentals. So now the process communication model is actually been added to the professional learning the skills for teachers, so they can go and do the course and upskill. But it should be something that's available to all our students in all our schools.
I couldn't agree with you more, Wayne. Just thinking back to my hubby, who was, has this physical intelligence, absolutely brilliant at sport, and used humour as well, and then was just told, well, you're going to amount to nothing, and it's like, gosh, can we not appreciate the different intelligences here?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. And once again, it's the different communication channels, preferred communication channels, is a reflection of the different personalities. So if you're going to be effective as a team, as an organisation, you really need to have the diversity of personalities. And what comes with that is the different types of communication channels that are required. But in most businesses, that's not understood. So therefore, we're not getting the most out of our people, because a lot of communication is actually miscommunication. People are not actually hearing what is being said or the intent of what's being said, because it's being said in a different language to what they prefer.
Yeah. We need to become multilingual.
Absolutely, yeah.
Oh gosh. What was the question I was going to ask? Yeah, I just realized actually that I missed. I wish you told me. I missed part one of your course. And so, when are you running the next process communication model course? And do you run them in other places in Australia, or tell us a little bit more about your program?
Yeah. So the process communication model course that I run, there's the introductory course, which is the fundamental course, is the main course that I run. I run a lot of those in-house with companies and organisations. It's the one that's accredited now with the Education Department for Teachers. Something that I run regularly in Sydney. I have run them in other states, but it depends on where there's a demand. But it's a 3-day program, and the reason it takes 3 days is because there's a lot of role playing. There's a lot of identifying behaviours, because with process communication, it's actually a skill set that you learn to observe and respond. So it takes a bit of time to do that. Some people think, oh, well, that's a lot of time to invest. And it is a lot of time to invest in this busy world that we're in. But the skills that you'll take away are profound. And it just amazes me how the feedback it doesn't amaze me, but it's great to hear the feedback coming back from almost everybody that does the course is, wow. I was reluctant to put the 3 days in, but it's so good. I've got another course coming up, and the thing is, because it's such an interactive course, there's only 16 people on a course. That's the maximum number I can take, and I've got one coming up in mid-February, 18th to 20th of February, and then I usually schedule them about every 8 weeks, the public courses, and then in between I'm running other programs for in-house for companies and stuff like that. If people want to go to my website and waynepearce.com.au, it's got the dates on there for the courses anyway.
Brilliant. Fantastic. So I have so enjoyed this conversation and just, picking your brain, listening to your insights. And I don't know if it's possible to have one key message. There might be a couple, but for the people who are listening to this podcast, who have a genuine desire to build a high performing team, what can we leave them with as a golden nugget of advice? As if there was one place to start, this is where you'd start.
The first thing is just nurture, and you use the word curiosity a number of times during this podcast. You said I'm very curious, and curiosity for me is really the core attribute of anyone that's going to be successful in this rapidly changing world, because there's so much knowledge that's being unraveled day after day, and for me, if you can nurture and demonstrate a curious mindset, then not only are you going to master the teamwork concept quicker than you think, you're going to master any aspect. But as far as the team work is concerned, it just does come back to you've just prepared to have a crack and have a try at getting your people understand each other better and open up to each other and share a bit of themselves in an authentic space. And that starts with you as a leader demonstrating what that looks like, and you've got to offer a bit of yourself. And if you're not an open leader, then you're not authentic as a leader. And there's a lot of people like that, a lot of people in leadership roles that really struggle with that. They don't think that's necessary. Well, I can tell you from my experience, and it's over 40 years now, I've been working with teams at the professional sports and business levels. It absolutely is necessary, and as a leader, you got to set the example, set the bar, and lead the way.
Oh, so true. And just, gosh, something came to me when you were wrapping that up, around when you were saying about not necessarily changing the base, the essence of someone, but expanding on the skill set and the ability to observe, etc., etc. I remember once being in conversation with someone, and totally non-consciously, I turned the topic of conversation back to myself. And I wish I could find this person to thank them, because right at the end of the conversation, he said, that was really interesting, Claire. He said, but I thought you asked me about that experience, and I heard your version of events. And it was like this big medicine ball that just hit me in the stomach. And I thought, oh, shit. Yeah. I was trying to be interested.
Yeah, one of those aha moments.
Yeah. And ever since then, it's like, Claire, be interested. Stop trying to be interesting. You'll get your turn.
Yes, we've all got those little gems that come up from time to time that allow us. We don't learn in a linear fashion. It's like big growth at certain times, isn't it? Yeah, in plateaus.
Wayne, it's been an absolute privilege. I've loved our conversation. Thank you so much. Are you happy for people to connect with you on LinkedIn? Is it okay if I put your LinkedIn link on the show notes? Or
yeah, sure. Yeah, no, that's fine. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, thank you. Awesome, great. Well, and good interview too, Claire. Well done. Pleasure.
Thank you. I think we were in flow.
Yeah, we were in flow. Absolutely. We'll speak soon. Thanks a lot.
Cheers, Wayne. Bye for now.
Thanks a lot, Claire. Bye.